Yeah, today I would like to tell about People First campaign. Maybe you heard about it or maybe not. It's the first public campaign, joint public campaign of Ukrainian, Russian, and this time also Belarusian and international human rights defenders since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This campaign was launched last year in 2025, in the beginning of 2025, when in the international space started some beginning of the information about the possible peace negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. And that time we observed that politicians, they were talk mostly about the territories, about some, for example, rare metals or some other resources, but not so many people were talking about the people who were affected by the ongoing aggressive war against Ukraine. And that time, human rights defenders from Ukraine, from Russia, from other countries, they decided to launch the public campaign to highlight the stories of people who are affected by the ongoing war, and particularly the following 5 categories of the people. It's first of all thousands of Ukrainian civilians who were just kidnapped, detained on the occupied territories of Ukraine, and I will tell more about that people and their fates. It's also thousands of Ukrainian and Russian prisoners of war. And it's thousands of Ukrainian children who were forcibly transferred or deported to Russia, and hundreds of Russian political prisoners who were imprisoned for their support of Ukraine or their anti-war speeches or anti-war actions. And since the beginning of this year, the People First campaign was joined also by the Belarusian human rights defenders. And since this year, the People First campaign also covers the stories more than 200 Belarusian political prisoners who are imprisoned because of the support of Ukraine or because of the protesting against the war of aggression in Ukraine. And about Belarusian political prisoner, more will tell Anya. Memorial was one of the co-founder of this campaign together with the Ukrainian colleagues from the Center for Civil Liberties and with some other international organization. I would like also to show some map just to situate where is the all this situation happened, where is the war happened. Probably here in Krakow it's not so important. I had these lessons last fall in Washington University in St. Louis in the United States, and there I was asked just to show where is the Ukraine, where is the Russia, where is the Europe, just to explain it. Probably in Europe, especially in Poland, it's not so important, but just to remind you, to show that this time it's quite the recent map from the International War Study Institute, which was posted in the Kyiv Post recently in the middle of May. You can see that the Crimea is occupied since 2014, and the eastern part of Ukraine is occupied, and mostly civilian people, about whom I will tell today. They were kidnapped, they were detained on these occupied territories. And also we will speak, maybe not so much, but also a little bit about the Ukrainian children who were also forcibly transferred or deported to the territory of Russia from the occupied territory. You can just imagine that there are many peoples, there are millions of peoples who are affected by the ongoing aggressive war in Ukraine, but also some people who share solidarity with the victims of the war, with the Ukraine in Russia and Belarus. They also affected by the political repressions. As I mentioned, last year the People First campaign was launched by Ukrainian and Russian and international human rights defenders. But this time, this campaign includes more than 75 organizations. Actually, this number was before the Belarusian human rights defenders joined this campaign. And this time, I think the exact number is about 100 organizations. Here you can see that this time it's actually a huge campaign, and there are like many different organizations from many countries. You can see the logos of some of them. Many of these organizations, they are working on the ground. They are trying to support the victims of the war. They're trying to support the victims of the political repressions. They organize legal, humanitarian support and help. Another organization, they are more included in the support of people who were pushed to immigrate from the, for example, from Russia, from Belarus, or from Ukraine because of the ongoing war or because of the repressions. There are many different organizations. There is not so many rules in the People First campaign, but to be a member of People First campaign, of course, you need to share the human rights values. You need to support Ukraine because we are telling about the war of aggression, the war in which they're not like there is obvious aggressive part, which is Russia. And also, this campaign is only about the human rights organization. For example, the support of the victims of the war or support of the detained people who are detained because of the war. They share also many politicians, many political organizations, but in this campaign participate only human rights organization. It's one of the few rules. What about this campaign? I will just also tell a little bit words about it. For example, in the beginning of launching of this campaign last February, the public speakers of the campaign, including Alexandra Matviichuk, maybe you know her, it's the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize 2022 from Ukraine, who is the head of the Center for Civil Liberties, our colleague from Memorial Oleg Orlov, who also the co-chair of the Human Rights Defense Center Memorial, in which I participate, and who also was the former political prisoners. He spent several months in 2024 in Russian prison because of the support of Ukraine and because of the protesting against the ongoing war. And then he was released during the prisoner swap in August 2024. Maybe you heard about them when European and North American countries changed some prisoners with the Russia. And because of the swap, some Russian political prisoners, they were also free. And of course, Yevgeny Zakharov, the head of the Kharkov Human Rights Protection Group, and some other human rights defenders. They launch online presentation of this campaign. People First campaign, we are trying to work not only online, but we're also trying to operate in the offline world. For example, here you can see some pictures from the actions of solidarity with the victims of the war in Ukraine. And one of the symbols of our campaign are the keys. Unfortunately, I don't have, it's here. And sometimes during the public protest, during the action of solidarity, the members of the campaign just show keys as a symbol that people who are deprived of their liberties because of the ongoing war, they need to be free. And that we people who join this free life, who have the opportunity to freely speak, we also need to put attention to that people. I think it's the picture from this action in Kiev. And also we, last year we organized we're also trying in our campaign to work with international organizations. Here you can see some flyer from our presentation in Geneva in the United Nations meeting. We are trying to also to go a little bit beyond our European partners, but also to speak with the global partners, with people with diplomats from the global south, for example, or from other regions who are not so involved in the European affairs, and for that reason, United Nations platform is very important opportunity for us, for human rights defenders, because it's very, very complicated and very expensive to travel, for example, in the South America. But in Geneva, on the UN platform, you can meet other human rights defenders or diplomats from that countries and try to get their attention. We also, for example, last year we organized the special event about People First campaign in the European Parliament, just to try to get more attention from the European politicians and to call them to concrete actions, to take some concrete steps just to secure the release of detained people. And we continue working with politicians as well. And I also would like to show you some example from last year event in Czech Republic. Czech Republic is one of the country who is very involved in People First campaign and support many of our activities. And for example, last year we organized the special hearings in the Czech Republic Parliament, and one of the member of Parliament, he said that for him it's very understandable what does it mean to be in Russian prison, to be imprisoned in Russia, because his relatives were affected by the Stalin Gulag, and he has this family experience being in Gulag style prison. Yeah, probably in Krakow in Poland it's not so unusual, but I also remember when I talk about this topic with the students in the United States, for them it was a little bit another perspective. I just wanted to say that in our campaign, we are trying to use all opportunities. We're trying to be present in media. We're trying also to speak with politicians, with international diplomats, and we also feel that it's very, very different, for example, when you're speaking with diplomats from South Africa, for example, or from Brazil, who have one experience and one view on the situation about ongoing war against Ukraine. And for example, when you speak with diplomats from Poland or from Czech Republic, who understand what does it mean and how the Russian repressive, aggressive system works. This time I just also would like to tell a little bit more about what is going on right now with with the release of people. Here you can see some data about 2025 years. Since that time, also a couple of new exchanges of mostly prisoners of war between Russia and Ukraine happened. And actually recently several prisoners of war were exchanged, but just to provide you with some numbers, with some figures, what we are talking about. This data is based on the data calculated by one of the members of the People First campaign, Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. And during last year, actually, we observed quite the big number of exchange, and what was also for us very important, that not only prisoners of war were exchanged, but also several Ukrainian civilians were released during this exchange. I also need to explain a little bit more, because probably no of you are students from the law faculty. No, here is no lawyers. Yeah, I'm just personally a lawyer, and sometimes I have tendency maybe to speak a little bit from legal perspective. If you will have some questions, please keep them, and after the presentation we'll have some time. I would like to explain that in international law there is quite developed legal protection mechanism for prisoners of war and for combatants, for people who participate in the war as soldiers, as warriors. It's this protection mechanism were developed since the late 19th century, and there are some conventions, particularly there is some rules that prisoners of war, they should be kept in special conditions, and there is also mechanism how prisoners of war can be exchanged between parties of the war conflict, and there is also some monitoring mechanisms. But when we are speaking about the civilians who are affected by the war, we see that there are not so many mechanisms and that there is also many problems with protection of civilians. For example, in international law, there is only a rule that, okay, civilians should be protected. But what does it mean in real? And what does it mean in such kind of wars which we observed right now in Ukraine, in the war against Ukraine, when very significant part of the territory is occupied, and when we are speaking about Crimea, that Crimea is occupied more than this time 12 years. And the people are very affected, and when one of the country involved in the war, Russia has almost not limited opportunity to detain as much civilians as possible. And from this perspective, civilians, they are not protected. There is no special rules. There is no mechanism how it's possible to exchange and how it's possible to release civilians. And also Russian authorities, they sometimes, and in many cases, they use not documented methods of detaining people. Sometimes they just kidnapped people and kept them in some basement without any documentation. And because of it, we human rights defenders have this feeling that probably if even some peace negotiations started, and if it will be not the peace on the conditions of justice, but if it will be some deal, for example, and then in this case, probably for the Russian aggressive regime, it will be much more easier, for example, to kill this thousands of detained people, just not to release them, just not to return them to the Ukraine, because they are absolutely not protected. And and because of it, we also in our campaign last year, we started to put more attention on the civilians. And we were very happy that last year we observed that almost the half of all released civilians, which we observed since the beginning of full-scale invasion in 2022, they were released last year. And we hope that probably it was also the result of our efforts, that we were speaking with many diplomats, just also telling them, please release not only the prisoners of war, but also try to release civilians, because they are absolutely not protected. There are thousands of Ukrainian civilians who are kept without any documentation in Russia, without any contacts with lawyers, families. And if no one will try to release that people, many of them, they will really not survive. But also, I'm speaking now like about some success story, but in numbers you can see that we are speaking about like 200s of civilians. But in numbers, there are many thousands of such people. Because of it, our campaign should go on probably this year and also maybe many years later. I already said a little bit about the about our interim findings and our campaign. If some of you interested, I can also send you the link to very interesting article which was published in Foreign Policy in Force last year by Evgeny Zakharov, the head of the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. And you can find there more detailed numbers and also some findings for our assessment of the last year of the campaign. But what I want to say that we have feeling that probably because of our campaign or because of the attention to the situation from different sides, more civilians were released. But it's still only couple of hundreds, and we are speaking about thousands of other imprisoned people. But we also observed some problems, and one of the problems that among that released civilians, there were not so many elderly people and not so many women. Only 6 women were released last year. And it's one of the problems because war context is very masculine. And usually when we are speaking about war, we are speaking about the man world. And the stories of women who are affected, and it's like thousands of affected women, especially when we're speaking about civilians, because in the occupied territories, they're mostly women population, and women are who are most just suffering from the occupation. And as a result, we see that not diplomats, politicians, they put not so many attention to the women destinies. Women face affected by the war, and it's one of the priority of our campaign for this year to speak more about the women detainee, Ukrainian civilian women who are detained by Russian authorities, about women political prisoners, because they are suffering from the war very much, and as we see, they are not so involved in the releases, in the exchange. And also about elderly people, because many civilians who are this time deprived of their liberty, they are like 60 plus, and they also have a lot of problems with health, and they also need immediate support. Yeah, I just also a couple of words about numbers, because I mentioned before about exchange, liberation, and I mentioned also about some figures like 1,000. What we know, one of the problem of our campaign and the problem of the general situation with ongoing war against Ukraine and with the people who are deprived of their liberties because of the war is that there is not so many data, there is not so many information we know about that people. We have several sources of information. One of them is the official data from the Ukrainian Ministry of Interior Affairs. And in the beginning of this year, they stated that more than 80,000 Ukrainian people are now missing, and we don't know their whereabouts or any information about them. And of course, some part of these people, they are deprived their liberties by Russian authorities, and probably they are in Russian prisons or in some Russian basement. But some of them, these people can be killed during the war, can be missed for another reasons. It's one of the number. It's let's say the highest rate of this estimation. Also in 2024, it was a statement of Ukrainian Human Rights Commissioner from the Ukrainian Parliament who assessed the number of Ukrainian civilians who are kept deprived of their liberty by Russian authorities, about 16,000 people. It's another number on which we can a little bit orient ourselves. In the last summer, our partner from Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group, one of the main experts about the situation with Ukrainian civilians in Russian captivity, they had the list about 2,000 of people whom they know by names. But let's say it's like the lowest estimation, because of course, human rights defenders, we don't have so much information. We don't have access, for example, to the what is going on in Russian prisons. We can get some information mostly through the interviews, contacts with relatives who are in Ukraine, or also sometimes our colleagues who still have opportunity to work in Russia or in occupied territories of Ukraine, who try to go to prisons, maybe to speak with people who recently were released, and just to try to ask, maybe you also heard something about Ukrainian civilians, prisoners of war, maybe someone were in this prison. But it's all about, you know, very, very small pieces of information. And because of it, this list of names, it's like the lowest estimation. And also, and I will speak a little bit more about it. It's information from September 2025 last year. For this year, we will do like new assessment, and probably in summer or in autumn, we will publish updated data. The Human Rights Center Memorial, Human Rights Defense Center Memorial also collected data about more than 400 Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war who faced official criminal prosecution in Russia, because the biggest majority of Ukrainian civilians, they just kept without any documentation. But some people, they faced accusation, for example, in espionage or in high treason if that people will release Russian citizenship, because you know that on occupied territory there is program when Russian authority try to force people to get Russian citizenship, Russian passport, and when you get Russian passport, you can also be accused in high treason. Without Russian passport and espionage. Also, many people faced persecution and accusation in terrorism or in extremism. Of course, we are speaking about like political reasons for such accusation. Yeah, it's just, you know, some data which Ukrainian, Russian, international human rights community who are involved in this work have. But unfortunately, I also need to highlight it that there is not so much data, and it's very, very complicated to collect this data. I just, as I mentioned, one of the priority of People First campaign for this year is just to speak a little bit more about women faced during the war and Ukrainian civilian women who faced persecution in the occupied territory. And here I would like also to draw your attention to the quotation from the last year report of the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group, when they described the story Olga Che. Her name was pseudonymized because she is now imprisoned in Russia, and her relatives, they are also asking to publish, to speak about her story, but not to tell like her real name, because it could be dangerous for her. She is still in Russian prison, and she here you can see some description of her story, that she was deprived of her liberty on the occupied territory. She faced accusation in the espionage, and now she served 13 years in penal colony. Unfortunately, this time Russian authority also apply additional strategy, have to suppress people who are in prison for political reasons in Russia. They can also launch the second, third cases. I will speak a little bit more about that. And that means that, for example, they can accuse Olga in speaking about ongoing war in Ukraine in colony and put additional 5 years in prison for her. Just to provide you with some information how this system works. I also would like to put a little bit more attention about to the victims of ongoing war on the people from occupied Crimea, because Crimea suffering from the Russian occupation this time more than 12 years. And this time Crimea became one of the most suppressed regions under the Russian control. Unfortunately, human rights defenders this time have not so many data about so-called new occupied territories of the Khersonsk, Donetsk, Lugansk regions. But in Crimea, from Crimea, we have a little bit more data. And we can see that Russian occupation means very, very harsh pressure on the local people, and in Crimea, one of the target of this repression became Crimea Tatars, who are not loyal to the Russian authorities, who are very well organized community, who have a long story of resistance to the repression since the Soviet time, and actually yesterday it was the memory day of the genocide or deportation of Crimea population. And yeah, I just would like to tell you some story of Mukhtar Arislanov. He was, this story for me is very, very touching. He was deprived of his, he just was kidnapped in 2015, just 1 year after the Russian occupation of Crimea, and he just disappeared. And about 9 years, his relatives, no one knows what happened with him. They just were thinking that probably he was killed because in the beginning of occupation of Crimea, one of the measures which were used by the Russian authorities or some vigilantes who supported Russian occupation there, it was just to kidnap people who disagree with the occupation and kill them. And according, for example, to official reports of the United Nations, about maybe about 2 or 3 dozen people were their killing, extrajudicial killing, were documented by UN. But of course, the real number is higher. And it was during the 9 year, relatives was thinking that maybe Mukhtar was also killed, and they didn't know any information about him, but his body was also not found. But in April 2024, the information about him appeared in the Russian list of extremists and terrorists. Russian authority, they have special list where they put all people who faced accusation in terroristic or extremistic nature of crimes. Of course, this time many political prisoners, they faced accusation in terroristic or extremistic activity. For example, Memorial Movement were declared to be extremist organization in Russia last month. And the name Mukhtar appeared in this list, and this provide family and lawyers, human rights defenders, some hope that probably he was not killed, but probably he was all this year in Russian prison. Of course, it's this time still human rights defenders trying to find information about Mukhtar, and it's very, very complicated. But what this story tells us? The story tells us that people who are can be kidnapped from the occupied territories, they can spend like dozens of years in prison without any documentation, without any contacts with relatives, lawyers, and then maybe in some moment Russian authorities decided to call them as terrorists, and they can get some legal status from the one hand, which can provide some relatives with some information. But from another hand, this means that they will spend at least 15, 20 years in Russian prison, or maybe more. And also, I also would like to, because after that I will speak a little bit more about Russian volunteers, Russian human rights defenders, lawyers who are trying to support, who are trying to find Ukrainian civilians, prisoners of war in Russian prisons or occupied territories, or volunteers who are trying to bring some water, some food to that people who are very sometimes suffering in very inhuman conditions. And I will tell about this part of the story because of my positionality, because I'm Russian human rights defender. I have more contacts with Russian human rights defenders, and I know more about what is going on from this part of the story. But I think it's also very important to mention that it is not the story about that they are like Russian human rights defenders who are hero and who are trying to save Ukrainian people in Russia. there is many amazing Ukrainian human rights defenders, Ukrainian journalists who are risking their life, who are sometimes facing torture, facing killing in occupied territories, but who are still trying to go to occupied territories, go to Russia, to Russian-controlled territories, and try to support Ukrainian people who are suffering from the occupation. And one of the story, probably you heard about this story, it's the story of brave Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina, who was actually she died in Russian prison. She was detained in 2023 when she when she went to the occupied territories and also to get more information about the Ukrainian civilians who are suffering from the detention, and she was detained by herself, and she was kept in such inhuman condition that she died. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about her situation. Her body was transferred to Ukraine, but was also transferred partly, and we suppose that probably Russian authorities tried it also to hide some some evidence that probably she was tortured or killed. And it's only one of the story, and such stories many. And also there are like many Crimean lawyers who during all these 12 years of occupation trying to resist to repression, who also faced enormous level of repression by themselves. Sometimes they find themselves in prison, or they need to leave their lands, their families, and go to the immigration or find some safe place to continue their work in Ukraine, in the Ukraine which is not occupied. I mean, yeah, but because of my expertise, I will speak after that more about the Russian human rights defenders and groups who are involved in the support of people who are deprived of their liberties. But please don't perceive it as the story is only about the Russian human rights defenders. There are like many Ukrainians, very brave journalists and defenders who are involved in the supporting of people on the occupied territories. This time I would like to tell you a little bit, provide you with some evidence from my last year research. In last year, I did some series of interviews with volunteers who are still in Russia, or some people who are had to immigrate from Russia but still involved in the work in Russia, and who are trying to find some Ukrainian prisoners of war or civilians in Russian prisons and try to support them with letters, with food, with some humanitarian support, or sometimes trying to get them from the prison. And here you can see some quotation with my series of my interviews. For example, last year, one of the participants of this volunteer groups provide me with information that it's the quotation. We created a bot. It means like some online bot in Messenger. It was in Telegram, literally just last week, 1 year ago, the interview was, and it already has around 1,000 requests. That means that bot means that there is like chat in where people can just send some requests. For example, relatives that we think that some of our relatives, they're in Russian prisons. We don't have a lot of information, but please, could you maybe try to find these people? Civilians make up, I would say, about 20% of the requests. Still fewer than so in reality. There are many more civilians detained than military, but mostly these volunteer groups, they are working with prisoners of war because it's a little bit easier to find prisoners of war in Russian detention, but they still try to work with civilians. I believe it is extremely important information-wise to talk about what is happening inside the detention centers. For example, a lot was said, written about. There is the name, some concrete detention center in Russia, where very horrible stories happened. And the situation there did improve. Not dramatically, but it did. The reason what I got from this interview that when we are even in such very complicated situation, when we put more attention, that the situation can change a little bit better. Also about torture, I decided not to provide you with the quotation about very, very horrible stories about the torture which is used, but just to provide you with some, little evidence what is going on, just to imagine how it is to be in the Ukrainian prisoners of war or civilian in Russian captivity. There is, it's quotation, there is definitely a chain of comment from the top, because the methods of torture were the same in every region, no matter where someone was held. And it was also quite interesting for me from this series of interview to learn that in many different detention centers, Ukrainian prisoners of war or civilians, they experience quite the similar methods of torture. And the hypothesis of this volunteer group is that probably there was some command from the top, from the Russian authorities, just to use some special methods of torture. And also it was quite interesting from this series of interview to learn that sometimes there is very big difference, for example, with Russian prisoners who are imprisoned and who are kept in the same prison, and between Ukrainians. And I heard, I don't have this in this quotation, but from this series of interview, I heard that especially in the beginning of full-scale invasion, it was the feeling from the volunteers who are trying to work with this topic that Ukrainian prisoners, they were absolutely dehumanized, and they were subject of such level of torture which was unimaginable. I also would like to tell you that torture has different nature. Of course, Ukrainian civilians and prisoners of war, they are subject of physical torture and sometimes extrajudicial killings, but sometimes many of them are also subjects of psychological torture, and one of them is described here. It's also the quotation from that series of interview. I think moral degradation is even more widespread than physical abuse, although physical torture is, of course, is always there. They are extremely sophisticated form of humiliation, and form what people who have been released tell me. They say with you even worse than the times you were beaten. Here you can see description of one kind of torture when Ukrainian people, they need to learn some Russian songs, for example, Russian state hymn or some other propaganda song, and when some of the prison authority came to the cell, they name just some number and people need to sing this song, or if they will not singing, they will be beaten. It's one of the kind of this psychological, physical torture, which I was told when I did this series of interviews with volunteers. And also I would like to tell that people who are trying inside Russia or on occupied territories to work with this topic, they are also working in very, very harsh conditions. And here you can see very, very, I would say, very fair explanation that there is a group of people there who help with letters and with delivery parcels. And there is the story of one person who was involved in this volunteer activity. After he was released, he began helping Ukrainian. He was by himself also imprisoned. He is Russian. He was imprisoned for some criminal accusation, nothing connected with politics, but in prison he also learned that many Ukrainian people deprived of their liberties and they are kept in inhuman conditions, and he decided after his release also to support these people because he know the prison from inside, and he tried to help, and he was involved about 1 year in this activity, but after this year he also faced a lot of threats, a lot of scare, and he decided to stop this activity. And what I learned from this research that also usually people who are involved inside Russia in the activity to helping Ukrainians in prison, they usually participate in this activity about 1 year, 1.5 years, because after that some of them can face persecution by themselves, or it's very, very dangerous and it's very, very scary for people. For example, I also would like to say some story of Alexander Demidenko, who in 2023 he died in Russian prison, in the pretrial detention prison. He was volunteer from Belgorod region. It's a region in the border with Ukraine, and he tried to help Ukrainian people who were Ukrainian refugees who tried to escape the war and who didn't have any opportunity to escape, for example, to Europe, to Poland, to other country, but only to Russia, and who faced also many difficulties in Russia. And he tried to provide these people with food, with water. Also, sometimes he tried people to cross the border, and he was accused in treason for this reason, and he died in Russian detention center. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot of information. What happened with him probably was what happened with him and what led him to death, but we can just get this understanding that working and being involved as a volunteer and supporting Ukrainian people in Russia, it's very dangerous. And some people, they faced persecution and even sometimes death. From this series of interview, I learned that very, very important to have some legal support in Russia for Ukrainians in Russia. Maybe you heard many stories that law doesn't work in Russia, that law is absolutely politicized in Russia. And from this perspective, sometimes when I speaking about the human rights work in Russia, I'm asking about but why you are still like trying to do some legal activity in Russia if it doesn't matter? I mean, it's of course in Russia we don't have rule of law, we don't have any free court, but still lawyers, they have some opportunity to support people who faced politically motivated persecution, and even Ukrainian people who were kidnapped from the occupied territories or prisoners of war, because sometimes the only person who are allowed to visit people in pretrial detention center or in prisons, and they can also help people to contact with their relatives. They can also try to negotiate maybe access to medical care, and lawyers, it's actually super important persons in supporting people in Russia who faced politically motivated persecution. And here you can see some explanation from the series of interview and how these lawyers who are involved in the activity to supporting Ukrainians in Russia, they faced by themselves persecution from FSB, Russian Security Service, or from other authorities. And I would like to tell a story Maria Bonsler. For me, it's also a little bit personal because I used to work with Maria. Maria is one of the few human rights lawyers who used to work in Kaliningrad region. It is It is the western region of Russia, but the situation in Kaliningrad is very, very difficult because for many, many years this region was full of Russian security services, military, and human rights activists were there very, very suppressed for many, many years. And Maria Bonsler was one of the few human rights lawyers who were brave enough to go to the politically motivated cases and who tried to support people who faced persecution. For example, she also for many years she tried to help people who wanted to refuse military service in Russia. She also was involved in the case Igor Baryshnikov, it's Kaliningrad activist who is now imprisoned for his anti-war protest in the beginning of full-scale invasion, and he has very poor health condition, and thanks to Maria Bonsler, he get access to the medical care, he got some surgery, but probably because of other activity, Russian authority decided to imprison Maria Bonsler, and last year she faced accusation in so-called confidential cooperation with foreign organizations because of her legal work, because of her legal activity, but in the beginning of this year she faced new accusation in high treason, and probably she will spend about 20 years in prison. She is also not the young woman, and she has a lot of problems with her health, and this time she is literally dying in prison because of the trying to help as a lawyer to politically persecuted person in Russia and Ukrainians. I also would like to say a couple of words, and I think it's time to move further. A couple of words about political prisoners who face their persecution because of the support in Ukraine or protesting against the war in Ukraine. This time, according to the memorial in the September 2025, according to the memorial list of political prisoners, more than 1,750 people were imprisoned because of the war in Ukraine. I need to explain that if you will go to the memorial website and trying to get information about the list of political prisoners, you will find another numbers. You will find the up-to-date numbers, but numbers in general, like all political prisoners in Russia, will be something about 2,000. 2,000. But how does it work? Memorial very carefully collect information about politically motivated cases and take decision only in that case when we have enough information about the person, about the persecution. But this time in Russian reality, it is, and especially for people who are persecuted for their solidarity with Ukraine, it's very complicated to get information about their persecution. And sometimes memorial just doesn't have enough information to say that, yes, it is political prisoner. And for this reason, memorial also collect information about the broader number of people who faced allegedly politically motivated persecution. And according to last year estimation, the people who faced politically motivated persecution because of their solidarity with Ukraine, it was more than 1,450, but it's also the very, very low estimation because as the human rights defenders, we don't have access to the all information, and we collect information from these small pieces. I just would like to name a couple of names. Igor Baryshnikov, whose story I said, the activist from Kaliningrad, who is now in prison because of his street protest, his solo pickets against the ongoing war in Ukraine. Alexei Gorinov, in his case, I'm involved personally. I personally work as a lawyer on his case. He's Russian oppositional politician who one of the first faced the persecution for so-called dissemination of fake news about Russian army, because being the member of municipal council in March 2022, he just stand up and said that we can't speak about some local affairs. Right now, the aggressive war going on in Ukraine, and Ukrainian children are dying because of the Russian bombs, and we don't have any moral rights to speak about some festivals for children in Moscow. And for his this speech, he was imprisoned for 7 years. Then he faced additional prosecution for his discussion of war with cellmates in prison, and he got additional imprisonment. Maria Ponomarenko, brave journalist who also was imprisoned initially for her journalist work, and she was writing about the war against Ukraine. And this time she also faced 2 additional prosecution, and now she was imprisoned initially because of also dissemination of fake news about Russian army, but then she faced in prison 2 additional prosecution, and probably she will spend in prison as much time as Russian authority will wanted. Lyubov Lizunova, the activist who was imprisoned when she was 17 years old. She was a school student, school pupil for her anti-war graffiti, and this time she was transferred to the penal colony for not for children, but for adults. And also, particularly, I would like to say about Maxim Kruglov. He was recently, last autumn, he was imprisoned in Russia. He is a oppositional politician, one of the few oppositional politicians who stayed in Russia and tried from inside Russia to continue support the community, who democratic community, and try to also to keep human rights discourse inside Russia. He was the member of Moscow City Council, and last year he faced the accusation in also dissemination of so-called fake news about Russian army because of his publications and his social media, which he posted in 2022, in the beginning of full-scale invasion. And this time Maxim probably he is in pretrial detention center, and probably he will face imprisonment up to 10 years in prison. And what is very important about his case, that it's very typical for the new tendency in Russian repressive, anti-war repressive system. Here you can see data from the Russian human rights organization OVD-Info, which collect and publish data about politically motivated persecution in Russia. And you can see in these numbers that in this orange color, you can see the politically motivated criminal cases for against the anti-war expression or solidarity with Ukraine, and in blue, like all other politically motivated cases. And you can see that in the beginning of full-scale invasion in 2022-23, the Russian authorities just applied a huge number of politically motivated cases against anti-war speeches, but since 2024 they started to they continue prosecute anti-war speeches, but the share of this proportion of such cases became less and less, and another tendency, which is also connected with the Maxim case, that if in 2023-2022 Russian authorities tried to imprison people who posted or do some anti-war activity right now, but now they changed a little bit strategy. They started persecute people for their previous activity. For example, like Maxim, this time he's imprisoned for his post in 2022. And it's like new tendency that Russian authority try to also monitor information about the previous activity. Last moment. What can we do? How can we support people? For example, we can send letters to political prisoners and also to Ukrainians who are in prison, of course, for political reasons in Russia. And here you can see Project Vestочка. It's OVD-Info supported project. You can find English website of this project, and if you're interested, you can find political prisoners and also some people who are imprisoned from occupied Crimea or from Ukraine, about whom there is information, their whereabouts, and you can write their letters. You can write in Polish, in English. These letters will be translated to Russian, because in Russian prison it's quite complicated to send letters in other languages. It will be translated by OVD-Info volunteers, and it will be sent. And it's really very, very huge support. First of all, it's very huge moral support. Yesterday I was on the online event about Crimean Tatars who faced persecution since the occupied of Crimea, and colleagues from there said that it's really very important to receive letters when you are in prison, like human being, just to survive. And also it's very important signal for Russian authorities that this person is not forgotten, and that probably they will apply a little bit less torture, a little bit less level of repression towards this person who receives some letters from outside. It's really, really important. And there is also some other services and opportunities to send letters. For example, in Krakow, I know there is some marathon of letters to Ukrainian prisoners of war, to Ukrainian civilians, or Russian political prisoners, or Belarusian political prisoners, which are organized each month. I think in June it will be another such evening. You can get more information about People First campaign through our website. I will be happy to answer any question. Sorry, probably I speak a little bit longer. And Anya, please.
So, thank you, Denis, for your amazing presentation. Actually, I don't have any presentation, but I would be quite short in my expression. So just to, in addition to Denis' presentation, I would like to add some more facts and show you a first-hand testimony, which you will see later. Just a moment. Which are the facts? What are the facts? The facts regarding Belarusian political prisoners, and we were talking about Russian political prisoners or people who are held in Russian prisons, but in Belarus, as for today morning, there are 842 people which are considered as political prisoners, according to our colleagues, to Human Rights Center Vyasna. And I would like to speak some words about their conditions in these prisons. And I guess that it would appear another curious fact about one condition which is not particularly common actually in Russia, because in Russia, as Denis said, that you could send the letters, but a typical measure those political prisoners in Belarus are facing, there is an incommunicado regime. So it means that the political prisoners are not allowed to receive and send any correspondence, very often even with the closest family. Among other measures Belarusian political prisoners are facing is almost non-existent medical access, tortures in pre-detention centers before their trial, and it's like an imminent bullying and mobbing in a colony, in a prisoner's colony. Psychological pressure from the prisoner's administration in the colony. And I guess that the best illustration would be a short video as a Polish memorial, because I represent here, Denis is a part of Memorial Human Rights Center. I'm the board member of Polish Memorial, and recently with the Polish Memorial we've started a new project, and we are conducting the interviews with former Belarusian political prisoners who are currently based in Poland or in Lithuania. And 2 weeks ago, we've conducted the very first interview with the guy who was freed just 2 months ago in the beginning of March. He's in Poland now, he's safe, and he agreed to be in the interview.
Бросили в политическую камеру, где то чисто политики. Камера на 6 человек, свет не выключается ночью, каждые 2 часа подъем, не дают спать. Постоянные крики, при малейшей, по возможности, без возможности пнуть обязательно, несколько раз в день шмон, выгоняют на коридор, там по ногам побьют, прочие их любимые пакости мелкие. Все в основном, то есть за сопротивление так называемой милиции. Осудили меня в итоге только через 2 дня, дали 12 суток, правда, зачли эти дни. Вернули в камеру, состояние ужасающее, то есть камера маленькая, жарко, там понятно, что она на 4 человека, а там напихано 25. Там буквально негде сесть, негде лечь. Вода такая, что из-под крана ее пить невозможно. К счастью, еще немного повезло, что туалет был более-менее... понятно, что это дырка, но хотя бы отделенный, не воняло. Еда такая, что есть невозможно. То есть преснопамятный завод «Калибр», столовая, кормит Окрестина. Сам завод, насколько я знаю, просто уже давно помер. Там, похоже, только эта столовая жива. Но то, как она кормит, лучше бы не кормила. Удивительная вещь. Оказывается, не положена на ужин вода. То есть пить давали только утром и в обед. Не положено, политическим не положено никакие лекарства, плевать, какое твое состояние здоровья. Тебя просто посылают 3 веселых буквы, ни родные не могут передать, ничего. Ничего не положено, в общем. 10, по-моему, мая ко мне приехал дознаватель из Губопика. Опять угрозы, что мы тебя тут закопаем, у тебя тут столько этих репостов, что мы тебя можем пожизненно держать. Мы нашли, что ты с Матолькой там общался, вот тебе конкретная статья, по которой мы тебя осудим. Ты здесь посидишь, погниешь еще. Мы посмотрим, насколько нам тебе хватит. Мы с тобой еще встретимся и потом. То есть такой посыл, мягко говоря, не очень веселый. Понятно, что приходилось хоть на этом железе спать практически невозможно на голом, то есть вбивать, то 4 человека так или иначе ложилось на железо. 1 человек залазил под каждую кровать, то есть 2 человека. Просто буквально в тумбочки головами залазили, чтобы спать. И весь остальной пол усеян людьми, кто лежа, кто сидя. Потом, собственно, в начале июня, это 2, по-моему, число, приехали, дернули, посадили в машину, не повезли даже ни в следственный, никуда, просто на постановление, перевезли в соседнее здание ВВС. Еще покрутили носом, что не мытый. Я говорю, да как здесь помыться? Здесь никто не пускает помыться. На ИВС сказали, помоешься. На ИВС казалось, тоже не помоешься. Но на ИВС меня сразу принимая, врач подняла крик, вы что, он зеленый. Ему же явно плохо, что вы, что они там на этом цепи думают. Закинули. Я, то есть, думал, что хуже не может быть, оказалось, может. Если на цепи хотя бы на полу были доски, то в ВВС политических содержали тогда, сейчас я знаю, что уже не так, содержали тогда в карцере. Одноместном, бетонный пол, вообще никакой отделки, просто бетонный пол, 1 табуретка, одноместный карцер, не откидывающаяся кровать. Просто стоит табуретка, бетонный пол. И туда по 7 человек. В одноместную. То есть оказалось, еще может быть теснее. Еда та же самая, но хотя бы отношение персонала уже было не... То есть персонал покрикивать мог, и тот умеренно, но без особых угроз, без ударов. И хотя бы медперсонал, оказывается, есть. Бывает. Медперсонал каждый день приходил, спрашивал. Мне стало... На фоне нервов, на фоне того, что месяц на цепи, состояние ухудшилось сильно. И на третий, наверное, день, всего я там провел 7 дней, хотя должен был 3. Да, на третий день меня буквально вызвали скорую, скорая не приехала, пришлось тащить меня на 2-й этаж, там в медчасть, там ставили капельницу прямо на месте. Минимально откачивали. На следующий день стало еще хуже, упал в обморок, потащили, таки повезли в больницу. Свозили в больницу, там поставили, на фоне того, что у меня так была язва и панкреатит, меня наверх еще нарисовали эрозивный гастрит. Но медикаментов на ИВСе, в принципе, кроме минимальных, нет. То есть мне прямо сказали, вот тебя заберут, перевезут на тюрьму, там будет получше, что там будет хотя бы медикамент.
Yeah. And we are heading to shoot 14 more interviews like that. So, if you have any questions actually regarding situation in Belarus or regarding Russian political prisoners or Ukrainians, so it's your time now.
Of course, it's easy to speak, excuse me for this cruel explanation, it's easy to speak about losses, about fatal losses of this war, about people who are killed. But it's much more difficult to speak about people who could be or who are right now witnessing what is happening. They are still alive, and with our awareness, with our knowledge about them, we are closer to help them to survive this situation, hopefully. We know that we are dealing with very cruel regimes. 2 of them, we know that those regimes are cooperating, they are learning one from the other. We've heard from Anna about this incommunicado detention regime, and this is something really cruel because not only people outside don't know what is happening inside with their relatives, but also those who are detained, those who are closed in prisons, they also don't know what is happening around. This is what happened with, for instance, as I believe, one of the most famous prisoners of Belarusian regime, Tikhanovsky. Maria Kolesnikova. Maria Kolesnikova also, she was unable to understand what is happening right now, really. And yes, this is what those actions are for. We are not naive, probably, Denis. We are not. But some people should speak louder about this situation also. I still keep you on standby to ask maybe one question. Let me ask first, maybe, because we are close to the end almost, but people first action. As you mentioned, there was an idea that we are much closer to the peace talks or kind of a deal between Ukraine and Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. What happened with this something last year, because it was clearly last year, why nothing really big happened? We know that there were some exchanges between prisoners, and where are we now with this situation? And what are maybe the effects of your work with People First action, with dozens of organizations connected all over the Europe and almost all over the world, because Canadians, US organizations are there also.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. Actually, what happened with the peace initiatives, I think all of you observed in media. We all saw that in the beginning, during his election campaign, President Trump announced that he will get deal during the one day. It didn't happen, and I have feeling that probably many parts involved in this situation. They have different perspective in different image of peace. And what does it mean? Peace without justice and how it's possible. It's a big question. But for us as human rights defenders, we are also not so naive, and we understand that our influence on the political question is not so big. Politicians not so interested in human rights questions. What we think is important for us just to put more attention and to highlight the stories about the people who are affected and who can be very easily forgotten in any peace negotiation, and just to try to get more information about that people, because information is protection. If someone is known, it's much more complicated to do something bad with that people. And also we are trying to speak with politicians, try them also to prioritize the release of people. And we can see that there is mechanism that can also help to release people. For example, there is, as I mentioned, mechanism to exchange prisoners of war, and also some exchange happened this year. Also, we can see that some authorities can be interested in the facilitating exchange. For example, last year, Turkey were involved in the exchange, and also it is important to say that Turkish government, they are also very active in the question about Crimean Tatars. And for example, in 2017, it was one of the rare cases when some people who are politically persecuted in Russia were released because of the diplomatic participation of Turkey. We also see that Qatar is involved in the question about returning Ukrainian children. We see that this world has many parts which can be interested in the participating in the peace negotiation or in some humanitarian initiatives, and as our and of course European Union and European countries is very involved in the supporting Ukraine and supporting Russian human rights defenders. But we feel that this time we are facing the problem with which we need to cooperate with bigger number of involved parties, and because of it we also try involved in our campaign not only European diplomats, not only organizations from Europe, but also from other regions of world. It's very, very complicated because outside of Europe people are not so interested in what is going on in Europe. And it's we need to start speak about this situation from the very beginning, because Russian propaganda outside of Europe is, and also sometimes in Europe, is also very influential. Yeah, and because of it, it is very, very important for us also cooperation with academia, because academia has methodology, has experience with working with data, with working with concepts, with working with young people who are the future of our world.
Bartek, maybe I could add some words regarding Lukashenko trade tool. So, as you might know, there were several releases of Belarusian political prisoners in 2025 and in 2026. The last major release was in April. In the end of March or in the beginning of April. However, the Lukashenko regime is considering the releases as a trade tool. So probably you've heard that for the release of 100 or 200 political prisoners, the United States of America have lifted the sanctions against Lukashenko's regime. However, we need a very strong advocacy for the idea that after the release of political prisoners, Lukashenko regime would not gather new political prisoners, because what happened, what was happening in the past, the political prisoners were released. However, the overall number of political prisoners in Belarus has not been dropped, actually, because every time he had been releasing people, he held new ones. So, and now the main topic and the main idea of advocacy for Belarus is to oblige Lukashenko not to gather and not to imprison new political, I would say, victims of him. And for that, actually, we need advocation, and we need to highlight the stories of current political prisoners, of course, and the idea of that.
What would you say to someone who sees what's going on and they support what you're doing, but they think the situation is hopeless? Like what you were saying about President Trump not being very interested anymore in the situation. I think a lot of people are seeing this as, we support this, but it's hopeless. What would you say to people like that?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think it is hopeless if we are looking on the situation from this helicopter view, when we are looking at the geopolitics and on the powers dynamic. But when we are going to the ground and we are going to the level of particular person and particular lives, we can see that that legal support, that human rights support, humanitarian support matters. And for example, also from some letters from prison, from some Ukrainian prisoners of war or civilians or Russian human rights or Russian political prisoners, we can also get some information how people happy when they receive like one letter or some picture. In my slides, I also showed the picture which one of the Ukrainian prisoners received from his children. And it means a lot. It means a lot just to survive. If you are in the inhuman situation and you are facing a normal level of torture, psychological pressure, and you don't have, any ideas, will you survive or not, to get this very, very small piece of support, it's very, very important. And it's what I heard from the people who were released, that sometimes it's the only thing that supported them and helped them to survive. Also, sometimes I have more data about the political prisoners. Sometimes human rights defenders also manage to take people from the prison. For example, last year, OVD-Info documented more than 60 cases when people, Russian political prisoners, were released because of the human rights work, or their imprisonment were reduced, or they got access to medical care. For example, if you have cancer in Russian prison and you are suffering from the abnormal pain, to get some surgery, it's huge relief. Or if you have some other problems and get some medication. And without, without public attention, without some support, without also receive some food in prison, it's very, very important. And if we are looking on this level, of course, one life, 2 lives, 3 lives will not stop the war. But if we change a little bit perspective from this, power dynamic to the human lives, and it's one of the aim of our human rights work, we can see that actually we can do a lot, and that will mean like the lives of people.
Or you could simply propose to count all years people were saved from Belarusian prison, for example. As Maria Kolesnikova, for example, she was sentenced to, I guess, 11 years in prison, and she was saved 6 years. Like she was in prison for 5 years.
Yeah, and of course she wasn't be released if, for example, it wouldn't be such huge campaign in her
Which her
support.
cousin actually announced and held during all this time. I guess that we need to translate this question to English. Вы скажите на русском, а я переведу.
Каждые 2 недели в городе Кракове
Every 2 weeks in Krakow,
проводится такая акция.
there is an
Мы
action.
пишем письма политзаключенным.
We are writing letters to political prisoners, which Dennis actually explained.
Но вдруг кто-то из вас захочет. Вся информация, в принципе, есть на страничке мемориала.
Perhaps anyone from among you would join them,
Да, или же фонд такой есть, Порт Надеи.
or there is a foundation Port Nadziei. It's a local Krakow One foundation, and you could follow them on Facebook, I guess. Они есть на Фейсбуке.
Да,
They are on Facebook actually.
Порт Надеи.
Port Nadziei, yes. Or you could also follow the QR codes Denis shared.
But QR codes, it's for people first.
For people first.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you for your attendance and have a good life still with learning about this awful situation also. We need to be aware and we are trying to be aware. Thank you for that. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.